Now on the Deseret First Credit Union hotline is a writer and college basketball insider for The Athletic, Brian Bennett. Welcome to BYU Sports Nation. Brian, how are you on a Friday morning?
Doing great. It's almost February, which means it's almost March. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Indeed, and fittingly, because we are getting near March, we want to talk about the 9-seed BYU Cougars, that according to where you have BYU in the bracket. Why do the Cougars deserve a 9-seed even after that head-scratching loss at Pepperdine?
Sure. Well, first things first, I think the 9 to 12 seed lines are pretty volatile right now. But when I look to seed teams, first of all, I'm looking for quality wins. BYU's 3-3 in quad one. That's pretty solid, especially when you start comparing that, and teams around it. Minnesota is a team that I have as a 5 seed. They have three quad one wins as well. And then when you look at who they've lost to, yeah, the Pepperdine loss wasn't great, but it was a second of a back-to-back. They've got two really legitimate NBA prospects on that team, and Colby Ross and Kessler Edwards, and they've been one of the most disappointing teams, I think, maybe the most disappointing team in the West Coast Conference. But it's a team with talent. You lose a road game in conference, it's not a killer. It's only a quad 2 loss at this point as well. And then when you look at losing to Boise, to USC, to Gonzaga, I mean, those are all top, easy tournament teams, top 30 teams, in my view. And then some good wins, obviously, over Utah, at San Diego State, at Utah State. So I think this is a team that's proved it can play in the tournament. Where it eventually gets seeding, we'll see. But I think it's a pretty solid tournament team right now.
And that's the good news. And BYU certainly has 10 games left in the regular season, or at least we hope. Who knows with COVID? 9 before Gonzaga. We were talking about how many different losses that aren't against Gonzaga BYU could take and still get in. And it feels like it's still a couple, one or two. What do you think? How could BYU fare if they do lose a couple of times against non-Gonzaga teams and still getting into March Madness?
Yeah, I mean, I think 2 would be the most, and then it's going to be, who those 2 are, obviously, or 1 or 2. I mean, the one thing is they've played probably all their toughest road games at this point. They've already gone to St. Mary's, gone to San Francisco. Even Pepperdine, as we mentioned, has some talent. So you're looking at games against, Pacific, Loyola Marymount, Santa Clara, who's okay. But these aren't games that you really want to lose. If you lose maybe at home to St. Mary's or San Francisco, on a close game, that's a little bit more understandable. But I don't think you want to be taking on too much water. I do think the WCC is going to get 2 teams in, though. It's been a pretty solid multi-bid league here for many years now, and I think Gonzaga's tail is gonna carry at least one team in. So I feel pretty good about them getting in. But if they lose 3 games, then you're talking about and go out early in a tournament, if there is a tournament, then you're talking maybe some sweated out situations.
Yeah, then you look at a third bid, and it doesn't feel like this is a year where the WCC is going to get a third bid. St. Mary's has certainly had a tough schedule like BYU out of the gate, but there's just not the star power that they've had the last couple of years in Moraga, and then there's not another team that looks like it's going to make the tourney. So you think it's probably a 2-bid league this year?
I do, yeah. As you mentioned, I just don't think St. Mary's has the resume at all. None of the other teams really do, and then you start to think, well, maybe somebody could win the conference tournament, and then you remember that Gonzaga exists. So that's pretty much out the window on that. So yeah, I think this is a 2-bid league. I just don't see a third team at this point.
Brian Bennett, college basketball insider for The Athletic, with us on BYU Sports Nation. Brian just mentioned in passing if there is a conference tournament. Let's dive deeper into that. What do you expect the NCAA to do in response to elite teams like the aforementioned Gonzaga Bulldogs potentially opting out of conference tournaments to reduce risk of COVID exposure?
Right. It's a really interesting situation. There's a lot of different ways to look at it. The NCAA is a little limited in what they can do because these are events that are run, of course, by the conferences themselves. The NCAA doesn't put on these events, so it's not like they can really dictate what they can do. But I do think the selection committee can come out and say, we want to see you in your conference tournament if there is one. I think the biggest issue is going to be teams who might want to opt out. If a Gonzaga says, hey, why do we need to go to Las Vegas for a week and risk getting, an outbreak? We're already in. We're already a 1 seed. But I don't. The NCAA selection committee is not going to want to see that and then see a team like Santa Clara or St. Mary's win the WCC and have to take that team in. I just think that's a horrible look for the sport. It's a bad look for your championship. So I do think the committee can come out and strongly say one way or the other what it wants to see from these conference tournaments, and then the conferences can decide themselves, how they want to approach things, because it is the conferences themselves who decide their own automatic bids, not the NCAA. So, but I think some stern words maybe from Indianapolis could help us avoid some bad situations.
Yeah, it could get weird, right? Because you look at the amount, a unit was worth $282,000 last year. That's about $1.7 million over 6 years. So if the WCC wanted to, bend the rules, and they're not the only league thinking about it, I imagine, where you say, hey, Gonzaga, BYU, and Mark Few brought it up. He said, well, what if we protect those two teams and then we get a third team in? That's a big deal. And, of course, a couple of years ago, Gonzaga flexed its muscle and said, hey, we might go to the Mountain West, got more of its share, got more of what it wants with the show unit or the units and whatnot. So it's interesting right now. And we are, 6 weeks out, 7 weeks out from the start of the tournament, and we have yet to have any stern answers other than, hey, we want you to wear goggles on the bus when you're traveling in. Like, what's going on?
Yeah, and the real issue is outbreaks before getting to Indianapolis, right? I mean, if something happens, God forbid, to a team like a Gonzaga or a Baylor the week before, and they're not able to field their full team in the first and second round, and they get upset, I mean, that's just going to be a nightmare scenario. So, I'd like to see some compromise here. I don't really see the point of bringing 10, 12, 14 teams to a neutral location this year for a conference tournament. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. It's never made a ton of competitive sense, right? You play an entire regular season, and then you bring your 12th place team to have a chance to win the championship, and that's never made a ton of sense to me. But I could definitely get behind maybe some pared down events, maybe some home sites, and then you bring the top four maybe. The other thing is, you've seen a lot of leagues, not so much the West Coast, but a lot of leagues this year have wildly unbalanced schedules, playing these back-to-backs where they don't get a home game maybe against the top 2 or 3 teams in the league. So it's even a regular season championship isn't necessarily as valid as it has been. So there are a lot of questions out there. Just hope that somebody has the answers, because I don't.
College basketball writer and insider for The Athletic, Brian Bennett, with us on BYU Sports Nation. Getting back to BYU and building their resume, they are heavily favored in the 9 games leading up to the 10th game and the finale against Gonzaga. Let's say best case scenario, BYU wins all 9 of those games before they take on Gonzaga in Provo. How much would that impact BYU's potential seeding going into Selection Sunday?
Yeah, I mean, it's always a little difficult to answer that question, because you have to know what happens elsewhere. Obviously, some teams that are currently a little bit ahead of it. But when you look at the schedule, I mean, if I could be wrong, but I don't think there's another quad 1 out there. Just looking at it briefly here, I don't see any quad 1 opportunities. So the best you're going to do is maybe add some quad 2 wins to your resume, and nothing wrong with those, but those aren't the ones that usually kind of get you that big boost up the seed line. But let's say they end the season on a long winning streak, play Gonzaga tough at home, and they end up with 21, 22 wins. I mean, that's a team I think that could be a 7 seed, a 6 if depending on where it goes elsewhere. But again, right, I have 3 quad 1 wins, and I don't see how they're going to get to number 4. And there's going to be a lot of teams, I think, that pass them in that part of the resume.
Mark Pope has done a tremendous job the last couple of years here at BYU, taking over for Dave Rose. Took a group that didn't make the NIT with some talent to a projected 6th seed last year before the pandemic hit. And then this year, BYU's firmly in, including in your bracket and many others. What do you think of what Mark Pope has done with BYU the last 1+ years?
Yeah, I probably have a different perspective on most people, because I actually went to college with Mark. We were at UK at the same time. And I got to know him a little bit there, so I've followed his career pretty closely. But yeah, I think from a national perspective, especially just speaking from media, everybody's been really impressed with what he's done there. Not only what he did before BYU, then coming in last year. And granted, he had some senior talent on that team, but obviously he brought Toulson in with him, who was a great player. I thought that team was a legitimate Final Four contender last year. I mean, I really liked that team, and it's a shame that he didn't get a shot at playing in the tournament. But then to come back this year and retool, losing those 3 great seniors, and bringing in a Matt Harms, what he's done with Alex Porcello, and just having this team again pretty firmly in the NCAA tournament. I mean, this is a program that wasn't making consecutive trips to the NCAA tournament all that regularly before he got there. So I think, what he's done has been very, very impressive.
Brian's latest brackets out this morning on The Athletic. Brian, for those that want to read more of this awesomeness and potentially some more insider access to what you think about Mark Pope, where can they find that kind of stuff?
Yeah, go to theathletic.com, the college basketball page. You can find the bracket there this morning. You can follow me on Twitter at @Brian_Bennett, and that's where you'll find all of my work.
Brian Bennett holding it down in Louisville, Kentucky. Thanks for joining us, man.
Hey, thanks for having me as always.
You got it. Brian Bennett on the Deseret First Credit Union Hotline. Deseret First, you know why, we show how.
Okay, coming